When I started my journey as a PokeMMO PVP player, I was pretty clueless when it came to EV spreading. I didn't know where to start, how to proceed, and there wasn't much information online. But as I progressed, I realized that I had to learn how to make my own EV spreads and understand how it worked if I wanted to become a better player. Hence why I made this guide. I'm now more experienced and have the knowledge to help out players who might be in the same situation that I was in and want to improve at the game. Just a few comments before I start. If you're completely new to PvP or Pokemon or both, then I recommend that you do not do your own EV spreads just yet. Try to copy them from the PokePaste that you can get on Discord or online, or from the built-in spreads that you can find on the EV calc tool, which I'm going to link in the description. Secondly, I'm not going to cover the basics of EVs, like how to increase them, how to decrease them, and all that stuff, because I'm going to go off the assumption that you already know how to do that. So in this video, I'm going to dive straight into EV spreading for PvP. Thirdly, I did find a guide on the PokeMMO forums on competitive EV spreading, and it did serve as an inspiration for certain parts of this video, so shout out to OrangeManiac for making it, and I'll also link that in the description. Now, without further ado, let's get started. Alright, so this is the structure I'm going to follow in this guide. Firstly, I'm going to talk about why you should learn how to EV spread, why it's beneficial for you. Secondly, I'm going to go over the tools you need to do EV spreading, to run your calcs. Thirdly, I'm going to go over how EVs interact with IVs and Nature. Fourthly, I'm going to talk about the particular case of EV spreading with the HP stat. And fifthly, the last point, this is the most important one, so pay close attention to this. This is the core of this guide. The title is EV spreading according to the function of your Pokemon, so the abstract function and the concrete function. Mind you, on a side note, that these are concepts that I labeled, so they are not like official concepts in the PvP Pokemon community. It's just to make this guide easier for you to understand. So yeah, that's what abstract and concrete functions are meant to do. And I will go over them once we get to that part. I'll define them and you'll understand what I mean. Alright, let's begin on why you should know how to EV spread as a PvP player. The first reason is independence. It's not having to rely on other people's pokepastes, on other people's builds. It's being able to know how to do this by yourself. I'm not saying you shouldn't rely on others. You can still use pokepastes, but it's always better to know how to do something on your own. Secondly, you need to understand why Pokemons have certain EV spreads. So let's say you are using someone else's pokepaste. Well, you need to know why the spread is a specific way with specific moves. You need to understand the coherence, the reason that was put behind that spread to be able to use that Pokemon in the best way possible. Otherwise, you might not be reaching his full potential. Along the same lines, you have to understand that sometimes copy pasting an EV spread, a pokepaste, is not the best solution, because in that other team that you copied it from, it might make sense. It might be fulfilling a good role, an efficient role in that context, but if you isolate that EV spread in Pokemon and you just copy it into your team, it might just not work because you have different needs. And this is something you need to understand, and knowing how to do your EV spreads will help you understand this. The third reason is to be able to allocate your EVs efficiently and avoid wasting stat points. I'll give examples later, but sometimes you can just tweak 20 EVs, put them in like speed instead of defense, and the impact is going to be much greater than if you had that 20 bonus EVs in defense. Sometimes just that 20 EV in speed can help you outspeed a bunch of Pokemons, and I mean, that's a game changer. So it's really about optimizing all of your EVs, even just 4 EV points, in the best way possible and not waste anything. The fourth reason is to tailor your Pokemon and their EV spread to the needs of your team. So you're the one building your team. You are the one deciding which Pokemon fulfills which role. So you are the one that should tailor and make their EV spreads. So if you determine that X Pokemon is there to deal with threats A, B, and C, you're going to adjust, you're going to adapt, and you're going to adjust the EV spread accordingly. Now, if you were to take someone else's pokepaste, it might not deal with those threats with the EV spreads that you're copying from them, even though that's the purpose of your Pokemon. So it wouldn't make sense in your team. So knowing how to EV spread by yourself allows you to be more autonomous. It allows you to really make your team according to how you want it to be. It's not enough to just know that you want these 6 Pokemons in your team. You also have to understand why they're there, what they do, and EV spread accordingly. Okay, before diving into the content itself, I will go over the tools you absolutely need to EV spread to run your calcs. The first one is the PokeMMO damage calculator. There are 2 versions. I will link them in the description. And this is the tool you're going to be using to run your calcs. This is where you're going to insert the data and, you know, do all your magic. You absolutely need this. I think it's Caav who made this tool, so big thanks to him. If you don't have this, it's just not going to work. Also, I'm not going to be explaining how to use it. I'm not going to be giving a tutorial because I already did that in another video, so you can go check my randoms PvP guide. I show you how to do it. I think Spidget also made a video on this, so you can check his content and his guide on this, but I'm going to be basing myself off the assumption that you already know how to use this tool. The second tool you're going to be using is the PvP statistics tab. Why? Because you need to know which Pokemons are popular, how they are built, which nature they have, to have accurate results when you run your calcs. For example, you see that Scissor is used in 40% of the games. This means that you cannot have a team that is completely weak to Scissor. You need to adjust and plan accordingly. Also, you can see which ability Scissor has. You can see which nature he is mostly run with. In 90% of games, he's Adamant. In a very big amount of games, he's run with Choice Band. So you need to put that data into the PokeMMO damage calculator so you can have accurate results. You're going to indicate that he is Adamant, he has a Choice Band, and you're going to run your calcs according to that information. The third tool you can use is the Pokédex. Very simple, just to know which moves your Pokemon can have and which moves you can be up against, just so you can calc accordingly. It's very important that you use PokeMMO's Pokédex in-game, because the movesets and the learn sets are a mix of several generations, things like generation 5, 8, and 9. So it's very unique to this game, and using another Pokédex might give you wrong data. So yeah, just to say that you have to use PokeMMO's Pokédex for this. Alright, let's talk about the interaction of EVs with IVs. These are details. They're really minimal, but these are details that can also change the outcome of a game, so it's important to know them. 30 and 31 IVs will provide plus 15 points in a skill at level 50. So it doesn't matter if you have 30 or 31, if you don't plan on maxing that stat, but if you do, you're going to want 31. In general, 8 EVs equals 1 point into a skill. So 8 EVs in special attack will give you 1 point in special attack at level 50. But the first 4 EVs you put in a skill will also give you a point only if you have 31 IVs in that skill, which is why it's important to have 31 IVs instead of 30 if you plan on maxing, if you actually plan on putting any EVs into that skill. You're going to need 31 IVs. So the first 4 EVs will give you a point, then every 8 EVs will give you a point up to 252. Now, the difference is minimal. You're only going to have 1 point extra in a skill that you max, so 252 EVs, and that has 31 IVs, compared to a skill that you would max 252 EV that would have 30 IVs. So only 1 point difference, and you might think that's nothing, but it can be decisive. So for example, if you take the 2 exact same scissors with the same EV spread, same nature, item, whatever, 252 attack, 252 EVs in speed, but one of them has 30 IV in speed and the other one has 31 IV in speed, well, the one with 31 IV will have 200 in speed at level 50, whereas the other one with 30 IVs will have 199 speed at level 50. So the 31 IV Scissor will always move first, will always be faster just because of that 1 point difference, and obviously that's not very ideal. EVs also interact with nature. Because if you invest EVs in a stat that is boosted by nature, it will result in a few bonus points. So if you max EVs, for example, in physical defense, and you have a bold nature, which gives a 10% increase in physical defense, then you're going to get those bonus points. So in general, 8 EVs equal 1 point, but at certain thresholds, if you max EVs into a stat that is boosted by nature, 8 EVs will give you 2 points. So this generally occurs 3 times if you're investing like more than 200 EVs. At 252 EVs, you're going to get that little boost 3 times, so it's going to be a bonus of 3 points in that skill. Here you can see an example. I have Zapdos. One of them is bold, the other is not. And you can see when I'm investing from 32 EVs in defense to 40, the bold one is getting +2 instead of +1. So it goes from 119 in that skill to 121. And the bashful one, the one with no nature boost, well, he's only getting 1 point with the same amount of EVs. So you can play around this and try to reach that threshold of +3 points if you don't want to invest all of your EVs in that skill. And you can have something that looks like 220 EVs in defense and then spread the rest elsewhere, because at that point you're likely to reach that bonus 3 points. You don't have to, of course, but it's still good to know that this is how it works. Okay, now let's talk about the particular case of EV spreading and HP. Sometimes your Pokemons will take damage or heal as a percentage of your health. For example, Stealth Rocks, Burn, Sandstorm, Leftovers, etc. And because of this, it's important to adjust your EV stat accordingly and precisely. I'll give an example with Stealth Rocks and Burn/Leftovers. So just so you know, Stealth Rocks deals 12.5% of your HP, which is 1/8, and it is affected by typing, so you have to take that into account as well. Whereas Burn and Leftovers deal or heal 6.25% of your HP, which is 1/16. For the first example, I chose Bulky Crobat. So let's say you want a bold Crobat and you want to max defense and HP. Well, intuitively, you're going to put perhaps 252 EVs in HP. And at level 50, that will give him 192 HP. Now, we know that Stealth Rocks will deal 25%, because as I said, it's affected by typing. So Crobat is weak to rocks. Instead of taking 12.5%, he's going to take 25%. That's 1/4 of his health. Because he has 192 HP, we're going to divide that by 4, because it's 1/4 of his health, and that's going to give us precisely 48. The consequence is that Stealth Rock is going to deal 48 damage every time you send Crobat in. But that also means that you can only send him out 3 times instead of 4. Because on the 4th time, he's going to die. 4 times 48 equals exactly 192. But if you take the exact same Crobat and put 244 EVs in HP instead of 252, so only 8 EV points difference, he's going to have 191 in health instead of 192 at level 50. So take 191 HP divided by 4, and that gives you 47.75. And the game will round that up to 47. So instead of taking 48, he's going to take 47 damage from Stealth Rocks. As a result, you can send him in 4 times instead of 3, because he will not die on the 4th time. He'll still have enough HP. So it's only 1 point difference. It's only 8 EVs difference. But you're going to take less damage and be able to utilize that Crobat in a better way. And besides, those 8 EV points are not lost, you're just going to be able to put them in another stat. Okay, let's give another example with Conkeldurr, since it's a very popular Pokemon at the moment. Because he has Guts, sometimes he is played with a Flame Orb, so he will be burnt, but some people also play him with Leftovers. It's up to you to decide. So take a conkeldurr with 220 EVs in HP. You're gonna have a conk with 208 HP at level 50. We know that burn leftovers deal or heal 6.25%, that's what 16th. So you divide 208 HP by 16, it gives you 13. Take the same conkeldurr, but give him 212 EVs in HP instead, so just 8 less. You're gonna have 207 HP at level 50. You take 207 divided by 16, that's 12.93. You might see where I'm going here. The consequence is that in one case, you will burn for 13 or burn for 12. But in the other case, you can also heal for 13 or heal for 12. So it really depends how you're going to play that conkeldurr. If you play him with Flame Orb, then you're going to want maximum 212 EVs in HP, so you take 12 damage instead of 13 per burn. Then you can still spread the 40 EVs elsewhere. Now if you play conk with leftovers, you would want more than 220 EVs in HP, so you heal 13 per turn from leftovers instead of 12. It's really up to you to decide how you play your conk, but since he's not a really fast Pokemon, usually in addition to investing EVs in attack, people put in bulk. So this is good to know. Whether you're playing with Flame Orb or leftovers, it's good to know these thresholds of HP and plan accordingly, especially because Conk is such a tanky Pokemon and he's sometimes used with Drain Punch. You can stay in several turns, so that damage that you take from Flame Orb or the health you heal from leftovers can matter on the long run. Okay, we're now at the last part of the guide, which is the most important part. This is really the core, the essence of EV spreading. And I've titled this part EV spreading according to the function of your Pokemon, so the abstract function and the concrete function. Again, these are labels that I put. They are not PvP vocabulary. I just named it that way to make things easier to understand for the sake of this video. So the abstract function is the abstract and generic function you want a Pokemon to have in your team, irrespective of other Pokemons or situations specifically. So it's like the broad idea of a Pokemon, the broad role you want him to have. So for example, you want a Skarmory to be a physical defensive wall. Now the concrete function is a concrete and particular function you want a Pokemon to have with regards to other specifically determined Pokemons and or situations. For example, you want your Zapdos to be a defensive wall against Conkeldurr, specifically Scizor and Rain. These are specific objectives. So there's no particular order to determine each function as long as they are coherent. They complement each other in a logical way, because in the end the objective here will be to design an EV spread that is determined and molded by these two functions. So your EV spread will be a reflection of the most optimal compromise you've found between both functions, but I'll get to that later. First, let's go over the abstract function of your Pokemon. So as I said, the abstract function is the broad role that you're going to give your Pokemon in your team, and it should be coherent with his capabilities. So like his base stats, his move set, his ability. You're not going to start running a specially offensive Gliscor, for example. It's not in line with his capacities. Alright, point A, some Pokemons have what I call predetermined roles. They only really have one viable way of being played, and it's hard to use them differently. For example, Chansey can only really be a wall, and you can only really build Chansey with a bold nature, Eviolite, and 252 EVs in defense and HP. Building otherwise it will just not really work. You can't use Chansey as a physically offensive Pokemon. It's not viable. I mean, you can, yes, but it's just bad. But point B, most Pokemons have enough versatility for you to choose that abstract function, so their generic role. So do you want Pokemon X to be used as hyper offense, or as a wall, or as a mixed special attacker and physical attacker? For example, Tyranitar can be used as a Spadef wall, as a physical offensive Pokemon, a mixed attacker. Infernape, same thing. He can be a special attacker, physical attacker, both. So it's your choice to determine their generic role, and this in turn should give you a broad idea on the EV spread that you're going to follow. So what do I mean by that? I mean that it's going to give you a basic EV spread that's unpolished and that may serve as a starting point. For example, you want a defensive Rotom. You're going to build him with 252 HP and 252 physical defense. That's the starting point. It's like the logical thing to do outside of every circumstances if you want to build him as a physical wall. Then once you have that starting point EV spread, so 252 plus 252, you can start to polish it according to specific circumstances. For example, again, the Rotom, even if it's bold, all you need is 12 EVs in speed to outspeed a Crowdount that's adamant with 252 EVs in speed. And that 12 EV can make the difference. So you take 12 EVs from physical defense and put them in speed. And I'm telling you, it does actually make a difference. I've lost 2 games because of this. And then one day I decided to change the EVs. But yeah, just to tell you that these situations do happen. So sometimes you don't have to change the EV spread. It's relatively straightforward. 252 plus 252 is fine. But in many cases, you could also be utilizing your EVs in a better way than 252 plus 252 and make adjustments accordingly. And yeah, that's kind of the point of this guide. But we'll get to that. For now, let's continue with the generic spread, the generic EV spread. So in general, what you want to do is max 2 stats with 252 plus 252 EVs according to the Pokemon's function and base stats, or what I call capabilities. So the function is the one you gave, Hyper Offense, Physical Wall, but it also has to be coherent with the base stats, the overall capabilities like the nature, the movesets. For instance, you want to play your Hydreigon Hyper Offense. Then what makes sense in Abstract is to put 252 in special attack and 252 in speed. You want to play Skarmory as a physical wall, same thing, 252 in HP, 252 in physical defense. Now I say that it has to be coherent with the capabilities because you can't, for example, really play Skarmory as a special defense tank. I mean, you can, but it's just not viable. It's not gonna work, and you're gonna use your Pokemon in a way that's not optimal at all. I ran some calcs just to show you, but even if you're fully specially defensive, a Zapdos will still 2-hit KO even with 0 EVs in special attack. So going as a Spidef Pokemon is not really gonna make a difference, because even if you're against Zapdos, and even if we disregard the insane damage that Zapdos is still going to do to you, well, there's still nothing that you're going to be doing to Zapdos. Like, what are you going to do? Brave Bird Zapdos? Like, there's nothing that Skarmory can do. And it's relatively the same against many special attackers because they all run, like, fire moves or electric moves. Like, Surp runs Hidden Power Fire. Rotom, obviously. Hydreigon sometimes runs Flamethrower. So there's really not much, like even Weezing runs Flamethrower, so there's not much you can do against them, and it's just not Skarmory's role, and it's not in line with its capabilities to start building him as a Spidef wall. You might as well just use a Pokemon that's better. That's not always the case, like something like Gliscor could work if you max Spidef, but I'm not going to get into it, but that's because he's his own specific entity, and he has his own specific strength. Which could make it work against things like Zapdos and Rotom, because he can block their Volt Switch, and if he's Spidef, he can still survive Hydro Pump and Hurricane, and then he can just heal from Poison Heal 12.5%, then use Protect and heal again, which is 25%. So in that case, it can work in a much better way than with Skarmory. So yeah, just to say, you should take the individuality of your Pokemon into consideration when doing this as well. Now, to follow through on this, it's not always the case. You shouldn't always max according to the function and base stats, or at least you shouldn't max intuitively according to that. For example, this is the best example. If you take a Chansey, it's by essence a special defense tank, but the best way to build Chansey is bold with 252 HP and 252 physical defense. So you might wonder, why not max SpidF, since it's a SpidF tank and its physical defense is terrible. It has 5. Why not run it calm as well? So with a SpidF nature, well, it has extremely high HP, which allows maxing physical defense to be relevant. Plus it has Eviolite, but also its HP in SpidF is already so fucking high that adding EV points in SpidF, that by adding EV points into SpidF, you'll virtually gain nothing from it. The marginal benefit from putting EVs into SpidF is meaningless compared to the benefit you can get from spreading EVs into physical defense. Now, to show you what I mean, let's take two Chanseys. One is going to be calm with 252 HP and 252 EVs in SpidF. And the other one is going to be bold with 252 EVs in HP and 252 in physical defense. Now you see that the first one, the SpidF one, takes 6.7% to 7.9% against Zapdos Full Switch. The second one only takes 2 extra percent. It takes 8.6 to 10.3. That's a 2% difference in damage. It's nothing. You're putting 252 EVs into a stat just for a 2% difference. It's shit. You might as well put it in anything else, literally, even physical attack. Now you take the same two Chanseys versus an Adamant Scissor with Choice Band, that's Technician, with 252 in attack, EVs. The first Chansey gets obliterated out the face of this earth. It takes up to 90% from Bullet Punch. It can die from U-turn, and it dies twice from close combat. It can take up to 240% damage. Now, if you take the Bold Chansey, it only takes up to 36% from Bullet Punch, 42% from U-turn, and it can even survive a close combat. It takes 96% at most. We're talking about cutting the damage by half or even by 2/3, which is insane compared to the 2% you get from maxing special defense. You can see that maxing physical defense is much more beneficial, and this applies to other Pokemons who are in the same situation, who have very high stats and then low stats in other skills. Such as I said, Jellicent, it works with this as well. Okay, now let's get back to what I was saying about the abstract function. Yes, sometimes 252 plus 252 EVs is the best way to go. No need to change it. It's fine if you don't. But in several cases, it's suboptimal and should rather serve as a starting point, because PvP is not abstract. Your Pokemon and its EV spread will be confronted to concrete circumstances, situations, and Pokemons. So by investing 252 and 252 blindly, you can be reductionist and limit your Pokemon's potential and incapacitate him in those specific situations that he should be tackling, when this can be avoided by only tweaking the EVs a little bit. So a Pokemon can and should be designed to counter offensively and defensively other specifically determined Pokemons and situations and serve specific purposes in your team. So what I'm getting to is that the consequence of this is that you must tailor your EV spread to maximize efficiency and purpose and reach your Pokemon's fullest potential in light of the objectives you are giving to your Pokemon. Which leads me to the next and final point, EV spreading according to the function of your Pokemon. And now we're going to talk about the concrete function. Alright, so the concrete function entails determining the role of your Pokemon according to specific Pokemon's playstyles or circumstances you are likely to face. So this is the important part of EV spreading on your own. And this is when you're going to run calcs and where all the magic is going to happen. So how to determine the concrete function of a Pokemon? It's pretty straightforward. The first thing you do is identify specific threats. So here you identify Pokemon's playstyle, situations, for example, rain teams, scissor, other popular Pokemons. And it's now that the PvP statistics tab becomes really relevant, because you can't ignore stuff like scissor that is in 40% of games, or rain that is in 15% of games. If you have nothing against rain, you're just gonna get 6-0'd. It's gonna suck. So you need something in your team to play against rain. Like, you have to. Then you're gonna designate a Pokemon to handle threats X, Y, Z. Obviously, one Pokemon should handle more than one threat. You're not gonna design one Pokemon only for scissor. Otherwise, it's really limiting. And even so, like, I don't think any Pokemon in their kit can be used only for one purpose. Like, they automatically have several purposes, so you have to utilize those purposes. With all this in mind, now it's time to EV spread, and for this part, obviously you have to use the PokeMMO damage calculator. So the first thing you're going to do is establish which abstract function combines best with the concrete function in order to have the most optimal EV spread. So you're going to need coherence between both functions. So for example, you have a Tyranitar, you establish the concrete function to be a counter to Volk, Starmie, and Ghosts specifically, and what combines the best with that? What's the best way of fulfilling that role? Well, it's to be a SpDef tank. So its abstract function, its generic function is to be a SpDef tank. So there's going to be coherence between both functions. That's what I mean. So it doesn't matter which function you determine first, but there should be coherence. They should complement each other. So I just gave an example of what would be logical, but what would make less sense, what would be incoherent, for example, is to determine the same thing, that your T-Tar will be a counter to Starmie, Volk, and Ghost, so that would be the concrete function, nothing changes there. But then you give him a hyper-offensive abstract function. So by deciding that he's going to be a hyper-offensive Pokemon, you're going to intuitively max 252 speed, 252 attack. But the thing is that it's not coherent with its concrete function of countering Volk, Ghosts, and Starmie, because if you run T-Tar as a fully offensive Pokemon, it's going to get obliterated by Starmie, Volcarona, and Ghost, because it's not going to be able to tank their damage, and it's not going to be able to outspeed them. Even if you're running Choice Scarf, Jolly, it doesn't matter, because usually Starmies have Rapid Spin and Volcaronas have Quiver Dance, so they're going to outspeed you, and then they're going to one-shot you. So that's an example of incoherence between concrete and abstract function. There needs to be some kind of logic, so make sure that there is. So yeah, to determine that balance, you should find an abstract function that best fulfills the specific role, but also try to consider the most optimal use of that Pokemon outside of these contexts, because you still want him to be useful outside of those specific threats. So you choose an abstract function like SpDef tank, because that's what would make the most sense for T-Tar outside of these situations. Secondly, you're going to start off with the generic EV spread that matches the abstract function. So for SpDef T-Tar, it would be 252 HP and 252 SpDef. On that basis, that's the third step, you're going to adjust your EVs to satisfy your needs and your preferences in the most optimal way. So you're going to start running calcs. And when doing so, you're going to ask yourself the following questions when relevant. So what do you need to outspeed? What do you need to tank / survive? And what do you need to damage significantly or one-hit KO? Why am I saying when relevant? Because if you're playing a Chansey, outspeeding isn't really relevant, so it has to be coherent with the function of your Pokemon. If you're playing a Bronzong, for example, what's relevant is not outspeeding anything. It's potentially dealing damage, but it's especially tanking damage. So yeah, these questions just depend on the function of your Pokemon, its role, and also it's just its basic capabilities. Yeah.
But every Pokemon has outspeeding potential, can take hits, can deal damage, so if one of these questions might be less relevant for a given Pokemon, that doesn't mean that you should completely disregard it. For instance, a hyper-offensive Pokemon can still be able to tank some hits, let's say because of its typing, so this would remain something to consider when EV spreading, but ultimately you should still focus on providing answers to the questions that are most in line with the primary functions of your Pokemon.
So you're gonna ask yourself these questions in terms of needs, so what do you need to outspeed absolutely with this Pokemon, but you can also ask yourself these questions as preferences. So it's like a bonus, as if you still have some leeway, if you still have the luxury to counter specific Pokemons, then you would prefer to outspeed them, or to tank their hits, or to damage them significantly. But this is secondary to the main role that it has. It's really if you still have some leeway, as I said, and that it wouldn't deviate too much from their main purpose. So when you have all this in mind, you take that 252 plus 252 spread, and then, as I said, you adjust your EVs with those questions in your head, and you tweak them, you run calcs, you limit test with damage, nature, items, moves. You do this for your Pokemon, and then you contrast it. So you, in the PokeMMO damage calculator, on the other side you put the other threats, and you run calcs for each threat that you have to neutralize with that Pokemon, or for the ones you would like to neutralize eventually. And you do that one by one. You run calc, you limit test, and you do that over and over again. Also, try including Stealth Rock damage, just to plan for the worst, to know if your Pokemon can still survive with Stealth Rocks or not, or perhaps maybe you should send in your Defogger, and then you can send in the Pokemon that has to survive those hits. So, you know. Also, try considering the interaction of EVs with HP, Nature, and IVs, as I discussed in previous parts. And lastly, remain faithful to each function and seek the most optimal compromise in terms of EV spreads. In other words, don't drift away too much from the abstract function and the concrete function. What do I mean by this? Well, you should strive to spread your EVs in a way that fulfills both your concrete and your abstract function in the most optimal way possible, without having to disregard one in favor of the other. Why? Because if you only stick to an EV spread based on abstract function, so 252 plus 252, or don't tweak your EV sufficiently, there's a risk that your Pokemon will not fulfill its specific duties, for example in T-Tar, neutralizing Volcarona, Starmie, and Ghost. And if you haven't determined specific threats that your Pokemon should neutralize at all, then you're limiting the potential of your Pokemon and putting yourself in jeopardy, even though this can easily be avoided with small EV adjustments. On the other hand, if you only spread your EVs according to the concrete function, then there is a risk that your Pokemon will only be useful in those specific situations. He'll be in an awkward position when you're not matched up against those specific threats, which is why it's important for your Pokemon to have a generic role that can be useful outside of those matchups in general circumstances, and this should be reflected in your EV spread. TLDR, establish an EV spread that is the result of compromise in such a way that both functions are fulfilled, so that accounts for specific threats while providing a useful role to your Pokemon in your team. Just on a side note, and this is my personal way of doing things, you don't have to follow it, but the three most common teams that you're going to face are A, rain teams, so with Pelipper, Kingdra, and all that. B, stall teams with Chansey, Skarmory, Weezing, Tentacruel, Weavile, you know, the classic. And then what I call top 20, top 30 teams. So those are teams that assemble 6 Pokemons from the top 20 most used Pokemons. For example, the Broken 6. So these are the most common threats. And in each one of my teams, I try to take these into consideration and build around them, whether it's defensively or offensively. So yeah, these are the most common playstyles, and I would suggest you take them into account. Again, I know this because I use the PvP statistics tab in addition to playing the game, so yeah. Alright, just in case this was a bit too theoretical, I will demonstrate everything I've just talked about with an example on how I proceeded with my Tyranitar. So the first thing I did was to check the PvP statistics tab, and I saw that rain was a likely threat. So to deal with that threat, I chose T-Tar because it's good into Pelipper, and it controls the weather as well. But T-Tar can serve other purposes, so I decided to give him the following, which are not in order of importance. So, as I said, weather control plus counter to rain teams, and preferably Pelipper, Volcarona, Ghost Trappers with pursuits, such as Gengar and Chandelure, Starmie Trapper, and an overall special defense tank against things like Zapdos, Hydreigon, Porygon, or whatnot. So these are the needs that my Tyranitar must fulfill, and I will spread my EVs according to this. So I'm going to start off with a generic spread of 252 EVs in HP, 252 in SPDF with an Adamant Nature, and I'll add an Assault Vest for now. So here you can see there's a coherence between two functions. It is coherent for Tyranitar to counter these Pokemons, and it is coherent to be a SPDF tank in order to counter these Pokemons. So it makes sense together, you know? As a reminder, in parallel, the questions I'm asking myself, if applicable, are what should I outspeed? So since I'm a wall with low speed, that's less of a concern, but I might be able to still outspeed Pelipper since it's pretty slow. Then what should I tank survive? Well, I'm a SPDF tank, so special attacks, and most particularly Starmie, Volcarona, Bug Buzz, Surf, and all that stuff. What do I need to one-hit KO or deal a lot of damage to? Well, ideally Pelipper, I want it gone ASAP. One-hit KO, same for Volcaronas, Starmies, because they can be pretty dangerous, especially if Volcarona sets up. So let's begin with the first purpose, Rain and Pelipper. How did I proceed? So I checked the PvP statistics tab, and Pelippers are mostly bold, which infers that they have 252 in HP and in physical defense, so not special defense. I run calcs with Thunder Punch, Thunderbolt, and Thunder because Tyranitar learns those moves, and Pelipper is extremely weak to electric moves. I also know that a lot of Pelippers, instead of switching out, they just U-turn, so I can potentially catch them off guard, and I know this, which is why I'm going to run an electric move. So I run calcs, and even though my T-Tar is adamant with a very high base attack, T-Punch does not deal enough, but Thunderbolt is enough if I have exactly 68 EVs in special attack, even with a nature that reduces special attack. I'm still slower, however, so I run some calcs and realize that all I need are 44 EVs in speed to outspeed the Pelipper, who might have 4 EVs in speed. So right now I need 68 in special attack, 44 in speed to deal with Pelipper. That is my conclusion. Now, as I said, I still have to remain faithful to my abstract function, so everything else is going to be in HP and SPDF. The question is, how am I going to divide it between HP and SPDF? So here I'm going to use all the residual EVs I have to invest 252 EVs in SPDF and 140 in HP. Then I have 4 left for something else afterwards. Let's start with Volcarona, assuming it's timid with 252 EVs in special attack. Which move am I going to use? I'm going to use Rock Blast in case it has a substitute. Rock is 4 times effective against Volk, so obviously it's going to be a rock move. So there I do a bunch of testing with Assault Vest, without Assault Vest, with 252 in SPDF and 140 in HP. I also try the opposite. Anyways, I come to the conclusion that if a Volcarona is modest and has Bug Gem and the opponent has their Stealth Rocks up, or if the Volcarona has Choice Specs, I might be in a bit of a pickle. And overall, it still deals a lot of damage. So I try to run my Tyranitar with a Careful Nature, so with a SPDF boost, instead of an Adamant Nature. And I see that my odds of surviving are much better, so I switch to Careful. But I still have to check if I have enough damage with Rock Blast, and then later if I have enough damage with Pursuit to defeat ghosts. Rock Blasts, even with 0 EVs in physical attack, I obliterate Volcarona with 2 hits. And I later see that Pursuit can also work with this spread. So that's what I'm going to do now. I try it with Ghosts. Do they die on switch out from Pursuits? Well, with the Sand Chip, yeah, most of them have a very, very high chance of dying. You deal at least 99% damage to Starmie. And we're assuming here that they're all timid with 252 in special attack, no defensive EVs, besides maybe like 4 EVs in defense or HP. But yeah, they all more or less are KO'd. I tested also the damage I would take from these ghosts or from Starmie, and I notice again that running careful is much better than running adamant, so this just comforts my choice. Could have a bit of an issue with Gengar if it focus blasts, if it has life orb, so maybe I have to take care of that and have something else in my team. At this point I realized something: I could be spreading my HP and SpDef in a better way. Because right now I have 252 in SpDef and 140 in HP. But I realized that by increasing HP, so taking EV points in SpDef and putting them into HP, the damage I take from special attacks is the same. So I start increasing my HP because obviously it's better to have more HP than SpDef if you're taking the same amount from special attacks, since with more HP you can also be bulkier against physical attacks. So first I try putting 252 in HP and 140 in SpDef, but then I see that there's a bit too much of a difference with special attacks. I take a bit too much damage compared to before, so I reduce it again. Then I find the sweet spot of 188 EVs in HP and 204 in special defense. The damage from special attacks is going to be the exact same, more or less, by like 0.1% difference than my initial spread. And I also designed it in such a way that I have 199 HP at level 50. And because of this, I'll take 24 damage from Stealth Rocks instead of 25 should I have had 200 in HP. Because as I said in the other part, for Stealth Rocks, you divide your health. So 200 divided by 8 is 25 and 199 would be 24. So I take less damage from Stealth Rocks, and those EVs are in something else anyway, so I'm not losing them. So the result I get is 188 EVs in HP, 204 in SpDef, 68 in special attack, 44 in speed, and I have 4 EVs left. I decided to put them in PhysDef. I'm going to explain why in a second, but first, just to highlight here my spread, I managed to deal with these concrete situations. So the ghosts, Starmie, Volk, I made all the calcs. I will deal enough damage to KO them, and I will be bulky enough to resist them. And I also remain faithful to my abstract function. So that was a concrete function, but now abstract function of being a SpDef tank, I remain faithful to that because I still have a lot of EVs in HP and a lot in SpDef, and I have an assault vest and I'm careful. So I found the best way to compromise the spread and the best way to optimize my TTAR according to my needs. Now let's talk about preferences. This is also why I increased its HP stat and reduced a bit its SpDef stat. As I said, damage was going to be the same from special attacks, but now I can also be good against physical attackers. So I'll take Dragonite as an example. So with my initial spread, 140 EVs in HP and 252 in SpDef, Adamant, D-Dance Dragonite, +1 from Dragon Dance, and Dragon Gem would have a 16.8 chance to one-hit KO me after Stealth Rocks. Now if I have 188 EVs in HP instead, it becomes a 50% chance in the same situation. And just by having those 4 EVs in physical defense, it goes from a 50% to a 43% chance to one-hit KO me in the same situation. So this is why my EV spread was the most optimal in this case. It gives me a good chance to also counter Dragonite, but it's not it. Like, there's other Pokemons. For example, Gyarados. I have exactly enough special attack, so 68 EVs and special attack, to one-hit KO a Gyarados after Stealth Rocks with Thunderbolt. It deals 75.2% damage. And I can also potentially survive a Waterfall with a +1 D-Dance with that spread. Now, still with the preferences, I realized that I have a fourth move that I can choose. And in this case, if you still have leeway and you're in this similar kind of situation, my EVs right now, I love them. I think they're perfect. I don't want to switch them. I don't want to tweak them. So what I'm going to do is rather find a move according to the EV spread I have, and not change the EV spread for a move, if you know what I mean. So I realize that a lot of players switch into Pokemons like Conk, Garchomp, Gliscor, Scizor, Ferrothorn, Skarmory, Excadrill, and Weezing when I send out Tyranitar. So here the goal is going to be to predict a switch and hit it. It's not going to be to stay in, tank a hit, and attack, because these threats can all kill me. If it's a Conk, you just switch out, you get out. There's nothing you can do. You can't even predict anything. You're going to deal slim to no damage. But for the other Pokemons, it's essentially a choice between Ice and Fire moves. It really just depends on what coverage you already have on your team. Since here I determined that my T-Tar can also be good against Dragonite, I think what makes more sense is an Ice move. I also have a chance to deal a lot of damage to Garchomps and Gliscors, so that's really nice. Thunderbolt can still deal a lot of damage to Skarmory, so I don't really need Fire Punch. And yeah, Weezing, there's not much I can do, but Thunderbolt can still deal some decent damage, and Excadrill does not take enough from Fire Punch anyways, so might as well run Ice. I think it makes more sense if I'm trying to counter Dragonites as a preference. This is what my T-Tar will look like in the end. Yeah, as I said, you can choose other moves. It's really situational. It doesn't have to be Ice Punch. It really depends, as I said, on the coverage you already have on your team. Now, this Tyranitar I took as an example. I really do have it, and I really made it this way, but it's a very extreme example. EV spreads are often not this complicated. It's not always this deep. I purposefully chose an extreme example so I could develop the process in a very detailed way to help you understand fully what I meant, and to help you EV spread. But yeah, as I previously said, sometimes 252 plus 252 is the best spread, and you shouldn't change it, like it's the case for Chansey. So in some cases, you don't touch the basic generic EV spread that you get from the abstract function. And in other cases, the tweaks that you have to do on your EVs are very simple and are not so different from the 252 plus 252 generic spread. I already gave you the example of a bold Rotom. You're going to want 252 HP, 244 physical defense, and then 12 in speed, just so you can outspeed Crawdaunt. Things like Suicune with Scald, Sub, Calm Mind, Protect. You want 252 in speed, and then at least 204 HP for Substitute to not break against a Chansey Seismic Toss. Then you can tweak the Spidef a bit to resist Volt Switches after Calm Minds. You can also have 20 speed on your Bold Zapdos, just to outspeed an Adamant Breloom that's max speed. So yeah, these are normal EV tweaks. These are the ones that you're going to run into most of the time. But sometimes it can get pretty crazy, especially for Pokemons that are mixed and can serve several purposes. Can be good in special attack and physical attack. Pokemon I'm thinking of right now, as well as Infernape. I think that's an example of a Pokemon that can also have a pretty fucked up EV spread that you can calc up to the percentile. But yeah, generally creating a moveset and an EV spread to only counter one Pokemon, or like even 2-3 Pokemons, is not the best. But in PokeMMO it can be justified because there's a very limited pool of Pokemon. Like if you look at something like Scizor that has a 40% use, it's justified to have something to counter it, because you're gonna have that in almost every other game. It would make less sense though to have an entire EV spread and set just to counter a Pokemon that has a 2% usage rate. However, if you do have a moveset and spread that is meant to counter a Pokemon, but it so happens that it also counters a bunch of other Pokemons, then it's fine. Like my Tyranitar, it's meant to be counter to 4 specific threats, but at the same time, even with that very specific EV spread, it can still neutralize a bunch of other threats as well, which is really good. And it works with T-Tar because it has excellent stats in overall everything, in health and speed def, in special attack and physical attack, and it also has the Sandstorm special defense boost. And this works with similar other Pokemons that have very good stats and everything, like Zapdos, like Serp, like Garchomp. So these are the ones that you can really play with in terms of EV spreading. It's not like something like Alakazam that has really good speed, really good special attack, and nothing else. It's pretty straightforward with him, but with the other ones I've just mentioned, you can play around.
Alright, we've reached the end of the video. I hope this guide was useful to you in some way. If so, feel free to drop a like, subscribe, and share the video with someone else who might need it. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to write something in the comment section or reach out to me on Discord and game, and I'd be happy to help and discuss all of this with you. But yeah, I wish you the best of luck in your PvP endeavors, and I'll see you next time.